All right. Howdy, everybody's. Um, so I got some questions. Well, first off, I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. Folks that are either here or going to listen to this later. Um, so last Thursday, Thanksgiving, so we skipped the meeting. So I kind of expect attendance here to drop off, but I know a lot of folks are listening even after we record these. So we're going to try to hit some things that I've been getting hit with over the past week. And the first thing that I've been hit with over several times this past week is folks who think they're going to be questioned by police. I had one person who messaged me and he said, I think the feds are going to knock on my door. It's a federal matter. I didn't ask about the matter or what the matter was because his question didn't involve any of that. It was, if I show them my ANC paperwork, and as you all know, if you've watched any of the other videos on our YouTube channel, the ANC video, the ANC stuff refers to the assumed name certificate, because every state has a law that if you're doing business in that state using an assumed name, you must register that name. So everybody, most folks are walking around using an assumed name, which is your legal first, middle, last name, and you're using it illegally because you never registered it. So you were given that, but you never went in and registered the name. And there is a huge difference between someone who is using their name legally versus someone who is using it illegally. I've seen some memes where folks have said it is illegal to use a legal name, and which is partially true. If you don't register it, it is. So we're not going to get too much into the ANC stuff in the beginning of this. I'm just going to go over something that I've gotten hit with over the past week several times. It's police are coming or the police are here. What should I do? What should I say to them? And two folks have asked me, if I just show them my assumed name certificate, will they go away? The answer to that question is, I don't know. Probably not. I mean, if that's all you do is hand a federal agent, a police officer, an investigator, your assumed name certificate, don't expect them to even know what it is. They're going to hand it back to you. That's beyond most of their abilities to process. You're really not going to get an understanding of what that is and what you've done and still until you start talking to federal judges or perhaps state judges or prosecutors. Those folks they may not even know what you've done, but once you file some stuff in a court case and you let them know that you're operating within the law, that you've conformed to the assumed name laws, then they're probably going to figure it out if you approach it right. They'll try to ignore it because that's what a court does. That's what police do. They ignore everything that's not in their interest. They have no interest in anything they have no interest in. And what they have interest in is getting a charge on an account. And that account is the account with which you are doing business in the public. So we have to understand that our first, middle, and last name are being used to conduct commerce in the public. And when I say public, I don't mean out on your city streets. Public is a jurisdiction. Private is also a jurisdiction. There's an enormous number of jurisdictions. If you own a restaurant, that restaurant is under your jurisdiction for operational purposes, okay, or ownership purposes. If you are in Washington, D.C., that's a federal jurisdiction. If you're standing on a post office ground, that's a federal jurisdiction. So there's jurisdictions all over the place, but there's also a private and a public jurisdiction. All you have to do is look on your dollar bill. It says good for use in private and the public. So it's right there in front of us. Okay. So the question that comes out this week is, I'm expecting a knock on the door from police or from federal investigators, FBI agents, Secret Service, whatever. I don't care what the matter is. That's not what we're here to talk about. What should I do? Should I hand them my assumed name certificate? Now, I can't tell you what you should do. I avoid that. I don't give that kind of legal advice or lawful advice. I can tell you what I would do, and I can tell you what my experiences are. And then you can take that information and do with it as you will, because every instance is different. Everybody gets a different reaction because you're dealing with people. You're dealing with men and women. And even though they are in the public and they may have received some kind of training, most of your police officers only received 3-4 months of training, if that. In Kentucky, at least several years ago, I had a buddy that hired onto a sheriff's department. And the sheriff said, here's a badge, here's a gun, here's the keys to your cruiser. We'll get you in the police academy when we can. Good luck. And he was off. keep that in mind, because I was in a courthouse recently with a buddy, and he's pretty slick with this stuff. And we were trying to get something done with the assumed name, and we threw a curveball at the clerk, and they were over there trying to figure things out. And he looked over at me and whispered 3 things. And I was like, "What 3 things?" He said, "The 3 things." "What 3 things?" He said, "Well," he says, "every government employee is trained on how to do 3 things. And that's what they do all day long. Those 3 buttons they can push, those 3 levers they can pull." And we came in here with the 4th thing. So anytime you do something that's outside of those 3 things, they don't know what to do. Okay. And the problem with dealing with police is they have guns and they're prone to violence. So we never want to butt heads with police. I had an old cowboy tell me one time, he said, "Always be nicer than is called for, but don't take too much gruff. When it comes to police, be nice, be respectful, let them know that you're a man or woman of peace. That doesn't mean that you don't stand up for yourself. You don't resist. Okay. If a cop tells you to get out of the car, you let him know. You've got a gun. I'm going to respect your wishes. I'm going to get out of the vehicle. I just want you to know that as I get out of the vehicle, I'm doing so under protest. You're doing any search that you do without my consent, just so we're clear. Okay. But I'm going to do what you tell me to do. So if a cop tells you put your hands behind your back, okay, well, if you're arresting me, you're doing so without my consent. Well, I need you to get in the car. Okay, I'll get in the car, but it's against my will. It's without my consent, and so on. Okay. The problem is when you give consent, you throw a lot of stuff that could be used in your corner out the window. Okay. So let's say that a police officer walks up to your door and beats on the door, and you by some chance decide that it would be a good idea to open the door. So you open the door, and here stands a police officer. Now, having been in police work, I can tell you that the first thing I'm going to do as the cop is I'm going to stick my foot, if I'm trying to get in your home, I'm going to stick my foot in your door threshold. Why? Because then I've entered your house. You open the door and I have entered your home. So how do you close your door? Well, if you try to close your door, you're going to close your door on my foot. And then I'm going to reach in and jerk you out the door and put you in cuffs because you just assaulted me. And that may sound silly, but go read your state statutes on assault and battery. Okay. Not only did you perhaps just assault the officer, you may have battered him, or you may not have assaulted him. You may have battered him. In Kentucky, where I'm at, the assault and battery statutes are written together, which means that there is no statute on battery. They're coupled together. Battery is written into the assault statute. So you've already granted entry into your home. It's just how far is he going to come? So if you let a police officer into your living room right past your door, and then you say that's as far as I want you to come, you may have a jurisdictional problem there because you've granted access to your home, right? And how's it going to go after that? I don't know. It depends on your state laws. It depends on how much training he or she has had, how bad they want to go through your home. But let's assume for just a second that you open the door. There's a police officer standing there, and he says, "I would like to come in." He talks to you a bit, and he says, "I want to come in and search your home." And you say, "No, I don't want you to come in and search my home." And he says, "Well, if you don't let me in, I'm just going to leave and come back in a minute with a warrant." What should you do? Well, if you say, "You know what, since you've threatened a warrant, just come on in, do as you will, because if you're just going to leave and come back with a warrant, we don't want to do that. I'm just going to make everybody mad, so come on in." If he had not been able to get the warrant, it doesn't matter. If he did not have probable cause, it doesn't matter. You just granted consent. If someone walks up to your door, knocks on the door and says, "May I come in and search your home?" and you allow them, it doesn't matter what your so-called rights are. It doesn't matter what you've posted as far as signs. Okay. Once you grant consent to search something, then any protections you have had go out the window. I used to work with a police officer on a campus police department, and he had the highest arrest numbers of any officer in the department. Why? Every single vehicle he stopped, he would ask them, even if it was an 18-year-old girl, 16-year-old girl, or a 95-year-old man, he would ask the question, "Can I search your vehicle?" Now that puts the driver in a spot because most people are taught to be cooperative with authorities, right? And they would often say, well, why? And cops are trained in this game. He says, well, do you have anything in the vehicle that you shouldn't have? Now, that's one heck of a question, isn't it? That is a broad, general, humongous, gray question. Do you have anything in the vehicle you should not? I mean, what's he talking about? Is he talking about dirty magazine? Is he talking about fully automatic weapons, grenades, rocket launchers, crack? What's he talking about? He's talking about everything. He's letting you make that determination. Okay. And when you say, well, no, he'll say, well, then you shouldn't have any problem with me searching your vehicle. And it would work. People would let him search the vehicle, and he would arrest the 85-year-old woman whose nephew had borrowed her car. He had picked up one of his friends. They had gotten pulled over by police, and the friend had dropped whatever was in his pocket down in between the seats because he didn't want to get caught with it. And then he forgot to pick it back up before he got out of the car. Now this 85-year-old woman's driving around with a controlled substance, an illegal drug in her vehicle. She has no idea. She doesn't have any clue that stuff's down there. He would search the vehicle. He'd find the stuff. It would be an illegal substance, or it'd be a prescription drug that wasn't even in a prescription container, and that's a felony. You can't walk around with a prescription drug that isn't in a prescription bottle in most jurisdictions. And they would go to jail. And it wouldn't matter. That was what he was paid to do. That's what cops are paid to do. They're paid to do claims, to find claims and press claims on behalf of the state. So you never consent to a search, ever. And if you ever feel the urge to consent to a search, don't. Stop yourself right there. Don't consent to a search of your person. Don't consent to a search of your home. Don't consent to a search of your vehicle. Don't consent to a search of anything. Don't consent to entry by authorities where they don't have a right to be. Okay? So what if they knock on your door? Well, what if a cop pulls you over and he says, "Can I search your vehicle?" And you say no. I'm not going to allow that. Why would you want to search my vehicle? No. And the officer says, "Well, I'm going to search it anyway. Get out of the car." What should you do? Do you say no? Well, no, you don't. You cooperate. You say, "Officer, I'm a man or a woman of peace. I'm going to do as you instruct because you have the gun, you've got the badge, and you're in control of this scene. However, when I get out of this vehicle, which I'm going to do, and allow you to search it, it's against my consent. I'm not consenting to a search." If that officer did not have probable cause to search your vehicle or a warrant, he has to have one of the two, then anything he finds goes out the window in court. All right. Now, what's probable cause? Open sign that you've got something in there that's against statute, code, regulation, promulgation, executive order, or whatever. So smells marijuana smoke and marijuana is illegal in your state, that's probable cause. If he looks in your vehicle and he sees shotgun shells rolling around in the back floorboard, he may have probable cause to search the vehicle because officer safety dictates that if you have a gun, they need to have the gun secured before they continue on with the traffic stop. So that may be, depending on the jurisdiction, that may give him probable cause to search the vehicle. So if you're going to drive around, I don't care if you're going to do it with private tags, public tags, doesn't matter. Before you get in the car and drive around, check your headlights, check your taillights, make sure your turn signals work, and make sure there's nothing in your vehicle that would give an officer probable cause if they looked into the vehicle. No empty beer cans, no ammunition, no even spent shotgun shells because you go clay pigeon shooting, none of that stuff. Keep that stuff up. You may say, well, I have a freedom to do whatever I want, especially me. I'm driving around with private tags and I have a license. Doesn't matter. Save yourself from trouble. I mean, what if you're going to play the game, why not play the game well, right? I would also suggest, and this is just a suggestion, you can do as you will, that you don't put signs or stickers or anything on your vehicle that advocate any kind of political preference or indicate any type of stance that you may have on a controversial subject, especially guns. If your stuff says, "I support the Second Amendment," that officer may use that as probable cause that you probably have a gun in the vehicle, and then that may open you up to some conflict, okay? Are you free to drive around with anything you want on your vehicle? Probably, yes, most likely. Should you? Well, that's up to you. But I know that when I get in my vehicle, I like to give as little chance as possible that I'm going to have any type of headbutting scenario with authorities. And as such, I very, very, very rarely get pulled over. Now, I used to do investigative work, and I spent most of my day driving around in areas that I wasn't familiar with. And as a result, I was usually lost, and I usually did U-turns, and I broke traffic rules, all because I was trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B. And I've also done surveillance in my time with federal agencies, and I can tell you that the most difficult person to follow is someone who is lost. If you think you're being tailed and you want to figure that out, get lost. Literally, like hit a clover leaf and go around all 4 circles. Do a U-turn unexpectedly. Pull over to the side of the road real quick, slam on the brakes and come to a stop. Like, oh no, I need to check a map. You'll drive the surveillance team insane. But past that, during the years that I was doing this work and I was always looking lost, I got pulled over a lot. I probably have been in over 200 traffic stops where I've been pulled over. I've been pulled over by state police, county police. I've been pulled over by game wardens. I've been pulled over by the FBI, uniformed CIA, uniformed NSA, Air Force OSI, yeah, Army MP, Naval police. I've been pulled over by, you name it, I've been pulled over by it. I've also been questioned by embassies because in DC, every other driveway is an embassy. And oftentimes I would take my big old F-350 Dewey crew cab that I drove around in, and I would back it into a driveway, and I would sit there idling, trying to figure out where the heck I was or where I was going or typing up a report. And the next thing I knew, I had people tapping on the window. I can tell you that by being nice, pleasant, but firm, and following the rules that I just gave you, I've had 3 traffic tickets in my life. That's it. And during the time that I was doing investigative work, I only got hit with 1 in Richmond, Virginia, because there was an aerial thing going on. They had this huge speed trap. I come around doing about 12 miles over the speed limit, and they got me. And the officer told me after he gave me the ticket, he's like, sorry, dude. He saw my DOD template in my car, and he said, I wouldn't have written you that ticket, but we're in a thing. We got planes in the air. And if I tried to rip it up now, I'd get in trouble. And I'm like, don't worry about it. It's no big deal. Right. So I've been in a lot of traffic stops. And I can tell you that you can control how often you're stopped. Pay attention while you're driving. Don't cross lanes. Don't drive drunk. Save yourself a lot of trouble. Stay under the speed limit, or at least within 7 miles per hour of the speed limit. Speed limit 60. Don't go more than 67. You'll save yourself a lot of trouble and a lot of time, because you're not going to get there early or on time if you're late because you get pulled over. 95% of all civilians, their contact with law enforcement starts with a traffic stop. So if you're just, make sure your lights are good, make sure if you're going to drive on private tags, know what you're doing. Don't drive around without any tag at all, because then you're a pirate ship and you don't want to be a pirate. Okay. And if you're going to do a private tag, make sure you've got your ANC number on that tag so that can be ran. And you should already have worked to have that entered into NCIC per some of our earlier videos, and they can run that number and it'll pull you up so you're identifiable. Okay. Now, I want to talk about the question of, do I talk to police? Folks have said to me, I even sometimes get calls where people say, yeah, the police are at my door. What should I do? Okay. The adrenaline goes up, and all of a sudden people wish that they had thought this out more thoroughly. And that's a difficult thing to walk people through, because when the police are at the door and they're knocking on the door, they're already talking to the police through the screen door or something like that. It's very difficult for them to keep a level head, listen to what I have to say, and follow those directions while also listening to the authorities outside the door. Your best bet is to never talk to police, period. And so it seems like I can say that, but it doesn't ring with a lot of people, because I've even had people that I've been on the phone with and I've said, do not open the door. Don't answer that question, to the point where I've been jumping up and down in my kitchen. Don't answer that question. Stop. Listen to me for a second. If you answer that question, you're going to lose your kids and you're going to be in a mess. Don't answer that question. So, instead of hearing my words about it, let's listen to someone's words who have a little bit more knowledge about this matter. So there's a fellow named Justice Robert Jackson. And let me tell you what Justice Robert Jackson, what his credentials were or are. I think he may be alive. General Counsel for the Bureau of Internal Revenue, Special Counsel for the U.S. Department of the Treasury, Special Counsel Securities and Exchange Commission, Assistant U.S. Attorney General for the Tax Division, Solicitor General of the United States, Attorney General of the United States, and Chief U.S. Prosecutor. And here are his words, and I quote, "Any lawyer worth his salt will tell the suspect in no uncertain terms to make no statement to the police under any circumstances." Here's the deal. Law is far too complex for anyone to know what is and is not illegal, okay? And you may say, well, the laws don't apply to me. I'm a private person. Well, yeah, okay, we'll get to that later. But right now, just understand that the law is too complex for anyone to know what is and is not illegal. The Congressional Research Service cannot even count the number of federal crimes. There are, in U.S. Code, 50 titles and 27,000 pages. Statutory code sections incorporate by reference the provision and sanctions of administrative regulations promulgated by various regulatory agencies, and the ABA thinks that there's over 10,000 of those. So how in the hell would you know what is relevant to any particular investigation that officer or investigator may be doing? Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little story real quick. So I once got arrested by the FBI, and one of the things that I ended up doing during that whole thing was I ended up meeting with the U.S. prosecutor for this region, the guy who was appointed in the Eastern Kentucky District for the United States of America, the Eastern District of Kentucky. Now, I had a meeting with him. And when I was waiting to go in to talk to this individual, I'm sitting back kind of in a little corner. So the door, I go in the door, I take a right, I take another right, and there's some chairs there. And then there's a big waiting room. And so I'm kind of tucked back in this little recess area where I'm kind of just not noticeable. And I sit close to the wall in the corner chair, and I'm sitting there, and someone comes in, a woman, dressed very nicely, comes in with a briefcase, sits in a chair in the waiting room, opens her briefcase, and starts pulling out papers, folders. She never looked up. She never made eye contact with me. I'm sure this was a secure area that she very rarely saw anybody in. So about 5 minutes later, a fellow walks in. He's wearing a suit and tie. He's also got a briefcase. And I'm pegging these two for federal agents just because of the way they're walking. And he says to her, as he walks in, she looks up and she smiles and she says, "Hey, Dave," or whatever his name was. He says, "Hey, Susan." He says, "You will never." Now, I found out by listening to them talk that these were two IRS investigators. He said, "You will never guess who was stupid enough to talk to me today." And she said, "Oh, is it our friend George Jacobson?" He said, "Yes." He said, "I called him up and this guy spent over an hour talking to me. I've got it all recorded. It's great." And she said, "I never would have thought that would have happened. I thought he was clammed up." And he said, "I know, me too. But all I had to do was get him talking." They crucified that guy, I'm sure. They turned around at some point and saw me, and they both gathered their stuff up, and I could tell they were embarrassed. They had been talking without knowing that somebody was looking over their shoulder. Listen to those words, though. This is a federal agent saying, you won't believe who was stupid enough to talk to me today. So that's just one example of federal agents themselves knowing that you shouldn't be talking to folks. Okay. So hearsay, Rule 801. Okay, that's Rule 801 in the federal rules of federal court rules. Rule 801 is exclusions from hearsay. A statement that meets the following condition is not hearsay: an opposing party's statement. The statement is offered against an opposing party, and A was made by the party in an individual representative capacity. Everything that you can tell the police can and will be used against you. And here's the thing. If you got arrested and you spoke to the police and you get called to the stand and you were to say, your attorney were to say while questioning you, could you, or let's reverse this just a little bit. He puts the officer on the stand, the officer that arrests you. And your attorney, your defense attorney, were to get the officer on the stand and say, can you please, Mr. Officer, tell the jury what my client told you on this date at this time, because what he told you was actually good for his case. It's good for his case. So he's like, Mr. Officer, please tell the jury what my client told you on this time and date. Immediately, the prosecution is going to jump and say, hearsay. Objection, Your Honor, hearsay. And the judge is going to agree. What you tell the police cannot help you. Why tell them anything? Okay. So here's the thing. If you're innocent, you can admit your guilt with absolutely no benefit in return. Don't be in a rush to admit your guilt, even if you're guilty. In a federal case, 86% of folks admit guilt before trial, admitting to things that everyone knows is true. What harm can it do, right? So you could say, well, the cops know I was there. Why can't I admit that I was there? Well, by the time trial rolls around, the cop could be dead or he could have moved, but a confession on that one point could get you put in prison because they do not need that police officer if they have your testimony. Don't give it to them. There is a group out there that does a lot of DNA exoneration. So folks will get arrested, and a lot of these folks are in prison before DNA was a thing, and they've gotten folks out of prison who the DNA clearly shows that they were innocent. For example, like a rape case, they'll go back and they'll test, because they have the technology now. They'll test the DNA evidence that they'll have, and they found out that the person that's in jail did not commit that crime. They didn't do it. But in more than 25% of DNA exoneration cases, innocent defendants made incriminating statements. They delivered outright confessions or pled guilty to stuff they didn't do. If they had not pled guilty, would they be in jail? If they'd not, let me rephrase that. If they had not talked to police, would they be in jail? Perhaps not. So even if you are innocent and deny guilt and you mostly tell the truth, it's easy for you to get carried away and make some little lie or make some little mistake that will hang you. Once you get into a groove and start talking, and I used to be in this job, I used to interrogate and interview people, okay? And once you get people talking, things come out. Once you get people comfortable with you, things come out. If I, as the investigator, can get you to tell me two things that conflict, or you have no supporting evidence of that thing that you tell me, then that's pretty much what I'm going to use to hang you at trial. So let's just assume for a second that you're innocent, okay? And you only tell the truth and nothing but the truth, okay? And you say, I've got nothing to hide. I've had more than one person tell me that I've got nothing to hide. You will always give the police some bit of information that can be used to convict you, okay? So let's say that a police officer comes to your door and wants to interview you, and you're like, what do you want to interview about? He tells you that, someone his name's Joe. Joe died. And you could say to the officer, you could say, look, I don't know who killed Joe. I didn't kill Joe. I don't know who killed him. I wasn't near his place. I don't have a gun. I don't even own a gun. I don't even know how to use a gun. And yeah, sure, I never liked the guy, but who did like Joe? Joe was an asshole. I wouldn't kill him. I wouldn't kill anyone. Guess what's going to happen at the trial? The prosecutor is going to get the officer that arrested you and questioned you on the stand, and he's going to say, was there anything that raised a big red flag about the talk that you had with Mr. So-and-so? And the police officer is going to say, yeah, actually there was something. And the officer is going to say, what was that something? He's going to say, he admitted that he never liked the guy. And you think, oh, but he didn't tell the rest of the story. He didn't tell him everything. He took it out of context. He used the sentence that helped the case, right? He's not going to say everything else. They're going to put that up on a big overhead, and they're going to use that quote. He admitted he never liked the guy. Now we've got motive, right? Ohio versus Rayner, 532 USC section 17. This is Ohio versus Rayner. You can look that case up, Reiner 532 U.S. Code Section 17. One of the Fifth Amendment's basic functions is to protect innocent men who otherwise might be ensnared by ambiguous circumstances. Truthful responses of an innocent witness, as well as the truthful responses of as well as those of a wrongdoer, may provide the government with incriminating evidence from the speaker's own mouth. So basically what they're saying there is that if you talk to police, the innocent can get ensnared along with the wrongdoer. Ullman, Ullmann versus United States, 350 U.S. 422, 426. This is a case from 1956. Too many, even those who should be better advised, view this privilege as a shelter for wrongdoers. We're talking about the Fifth Amendment, okay? Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment gives you the right not to testify against yourself, right? Not to incriminate yourself. Too many, even those who should be better advised, view the privilege of the Fifth Amendment as a shelter for wrongdoers. They too readily assume that those who invoke it are either guilty of a crime or are guilty and claim privilege. And that is what folks overwhelmingly have replied to me when I tell them not to talk to police. They'll say, but I didn't do anything wrong. I have nothing to hide. And if I refuse to talk to them, they're going to think I'm guilty. I got some groundbreaking news for you. Police think you're guilty if they're talking to you. And it doesn't matter who they're talking to. You got to understand, those folks deal with the same crappy 5%, especially beat police officers. They deal with the same crappy 5% of the population over and over and over. Okay. I, as an investigator, as a federal agent, I have watched people do things with my own eyes, stop them and had them tell me that what I saw was not what I saw. People lie. And especially to police officers. They lie. Okay. What they don't know is they do better not to lie and just not to say anything. Okay. But folks will say, well, if I refuse to talk, if I refuse to allow a search, it won't matter. They'll just get a warrant. They'll just come in anyway. They'll just think I'm guilty. They'll just dig deeper. If a police officer is talking to you, he's only talking to you because he doesn't have enough information to press a charge to arrest you. And he's wanting you to give him that information. Okay. So let's try another scenario here. Okay. Let's assume that you're innocent. Let's assume that you're only going to tell the truth and you don't say anything incriminating at all during your 2 hours of talking to the police. Now, what I just outlined is freaking impossible. If you talk to me for 2 hours, I don't care if you're on the West Coast and I'm investigating a crime on the East Coast, I'll eventually get something out of you that I can use. Guaranteed. Okay. There's still a very, very, very good chance, and I would almost risk it and say there's a certain chance that your answers will be used to crucify you if the police don't recall your testimony with 100% accuracy. Okay. So I had somebody ask me one time, they're like, well, I've got a body cam on me. What if I videotape the whole thing? Okay, let's go with that. Let's just say that you videotape the whole thing. Okay. And police are at your door. You got a body cam on and they say, okay, they are asking you questions and you say, I don't know who killed David. It wasn't me. I've never touched or held a gun in my life. Okay. So this goes to court. All right. Suddenly you find yourself with charges pressed. All the officer has to do when he gets on the stand, the prosecutor says, hey, is there anything about that statement that seemed odd to you? Officer could say, yeah, he told me that he's never touched or held a gun in his life. And the prosecutor's going to say, and what about that statement was odd, Mr. Officer? And he's going to say, well, I never mentioned anything about a shooting. I never told him that I was investigating a murder. And you could say, well, no, I was with them for 3 hours. And while I was in the car with them, I distinctly recall that they said he was shot. Okay. But let's say that occurred before you started recording. Or let's say that at some point during there, something went wrong with the video. There could be any number of things that could happen. They may not even allow that video into evidence for some reason. Never can tell. There's rules of evidence. They can use that to crucify you on the stand. So let's say that there is, and if you're not getting it yet, let's do one more. So let's just say there's a robbery. Okay, let's say this robbery occurs in a town, Centerville, Virginia. I used to live in Northern Virginia. and outside of DC, crazy area. And let's say the police knock on the door and they say, you match the description of someone who robbed a store down the street the other night. And you say, because you haven't listened to this video, or you haven't thought this through, or you haven't had a one-on-one talk with me or another police officer or federal agent who could tell you that you shouldn't talk to police. And you say, I don't know who robbed the store. It wasn't me. I wasn't even in Centerville last night. Or I wasn't even in Centerville that night. I was at my mother's house over 4 hours away in Beckley, West Virginia. And let's just assume for a second that you paid for your gasoline with cash, so you didn't use a credit card. You can't prove that you were outside the area, and you have a witness. You've got a witness, your mother. Your mother can take the stand and testify that you were with her that night. Do you really think that that's going to hold any water with the jury or the court? It's not. It's not worth anything. Your mother testifying for you, not worth anything. Okay. But you're telling the truth. You have no motive, no opportunity. You didn't admit that you were there. How could that possibly be used against you? Okay, it can. So let's just assume for a second that in the police investigation, they have a witness, this unimpeachable witness, okay, this girl, and you were never enemies with this girl, okay, but you knew her, you went to high school with her, okay, and she is willing to testify that she saw you a couple blocks away from that store 2 hours before it was robbed. Now, if you did not talk to the police, any good attorney, or even you, if you've taken jurisdictionary, can get this thrown out before a trial. But if you talk to the police, then your information conflicts with the information provided by a sworn witness whose testimony is not impeachable. And what just happened? Well, that woman is now the star witness in the case against you. And you're going to go to jail if they can get a guilty from the jury. So if you'd never talked, that would be easy to take care of. But because you spoke to police, okay? Now, I'm not saying that guilty people shouldn't go to jail. If somebody were to kill or hurt one of my friends or family members or someone that I know, I hope they catch them. I hope they put them in jail. I hope they crucify them. However, if you're guilty, there's going to be plenty of time for that guilt to come out before trial or at trial or through this process. Don't be in a hurry to give them your guilt. Okay. At the same time, don't be in a hurry to try to defend yourself. Okay. A good example of this is Martha Stewart. I don't know if you know who Martha Stewart is, the big old baking lady. She's made a lot of money in the cooking media empire. She's built an empire. She got caught up in a tax investigation. What they accused her of, she denied. Okay. And then they charged her with lying because they were able to prove that what she said when she denied was not quite truthful. And if you're going to deny anything that has to do with the Internal Revenue Service tax code, you're a moron. Have you seen the tax code? How do you know that you're telling the truth? You can't. There's no possible way. You can sit and read that stuff for years. You wouldn't know it all. Okay. So they got her for lying. That's why she spent, 4 months, 6 months in jail, something like that. So to wrap it up, any lawyer, any competent attorney in his right mind, it doesn't matter if you're innocent, it doesn't matter if you were elsewhere that night, they'll tell you, don't talk to police. There's no way to predict that even truthful information won't be used against you. Okay. So this video is good because it's going to allow me, the next time somebody messages me, emails me, hits me up in the group or otherwise contacts me and says, should I talk to police? I'm just going to give them the link to this YouTube video because it will be uploaded to YouTube. And I won't have to repeat all the stuff that I just told you to them. So I'm going to save myself a lot of time. So with that said, we'll move on. And if anybody has any questions about anything, we'll be glad. And it can be about what we just talked about. It can be about something else. But we'll go ahead and open the floor up. If anybody has any questions, you can either type them in the chat. You can ask them. And if nobody has any questions, we'll wrap it up because I think I made my point. And if anybody's trying to talk, got to make sure you take yourself off mute. No questions? Excellent. Should I talk to this police officer? Okay, Chad, you have an exception. No, I'm kidding. You don't have an exception. No, don't talk to the police officer. Now, there is one exception to that. If you call the police, you probably need to talk to them. Oh, I know, it was a joke. I was kidding. Yeah. And now there is another exception to it too. You're going to have to interact with a police officer on a traffic stop, especially if you have a license. Okay. We'll do a whole other video on that because you don't want to get drug into the mud in that either. There's things you have to do on a traffic stop and there's things you don't have to do. If you are a licensed driver, I'm not going to get into the whole, I'm driving privately without tags or without license right now. If you're driving around with a driver's license and you have insurance and registration, then you should give that to the police officer when he pulls you over. Okay. But you're already into a contract once you have the license. Okay. And as far as talking, how to interact with police when you're trying to drive privately, we don't have enough bandwidth right now to cover that. But yeah, so, and it's easy to do. It's easy to get carried away and talk to the police because I've done it. I've done it myself. It's so easy. Never miss a good opportunity to shut up. So, all right. Well, thank you guys for joining. You all have a great night and I'll get this uploaded soon and I hope to see you next week. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Bill.
See you later, Victoria.
See ya.